Hey guys, I'm Mark with the TractorTread YouTube channel, and today I'm going to show you how to install the Discharge Restrictor Kit from Cub Cadet. It's part number 59A30048. This kit will fit the Pro Z500, 700, 900, lap bar, and steering wheel models. It'll also only fit the 48, 54, and 60-inch decks. This kit is really nice and easy to use. If you're mowing next to a flower bed and you don't want the grass to go into the flower bed, right next to the operator's seat is a handle. Push down on the button, lower the handle, and that closes off the chute, not allowing the grass to go into the flower bed. Since I never installed one of these kits before, I will be using the instruction booklet. I like to look in the contents of the carton and make sure that I have all the hardware and all the parts needed to do the job. We'll be going step by step so you guys know how to install this. Step 1 says to remove the steering wheel, and if you have a lap bar unit, just go to step 2. So to remove this steering wheel, you can get your finger underneath the plastic cap or with a screwdriver, pop it up, and the cap will look something like this. Then I'm using a 1/2-inch socket with a ratchet to remove the bolt holding on the steering wheel. The bolt came out pretty easy. Now we'll try to pop off the steering wheel. And that popped right off too. Step 2 tells you to move the seat all the way back, and you can do that by moving the seat adjustment lever toward the middle of the seat and sliding the seat back. Step 3 says to lift up on the seat. And it says to remove the seat latch, and you'll do that with the 1/2-inch socket, and I'm also going to be using an adjustable wrench on the other side. You do have to think ahead because you don't want to undo that bracket and flip that seat up and put the seat right through that shaft where your steering wheel used to be. So rip off a piece of cardboard from the box that it came in, lay it over top of the shaft, lay your seat up on there. I do have the lock nut loose on the end of the bolt. Carefully remove the bolt, holding onto the seat. Now we can lay the seat forward. Lay it right on top of the cardboard. Step 4 says to remove the right-hand seat panel cover. And I'm using a 9/16 socket and a ratchet. And it says to keep the hardware. The 2 bolts I removed were carriage bolts with lock nuts. You're going to keep that for a later step. Step 5 says to install the door handle. And we're going to do that by sliding the handle underneath where we just took off that cover. And then you're going to install the carriage bolts from the bottom up. Okay, installing this handle here really is no joke. You're going to be wondering how the heck to get this handle in here. I'm going to show you the easiest way because I just stood here for a while trying to figure it out. Push down on this button here, lift up on the handle so you have it up as far as it will go. And this end right here, you're going to aim that downward toward the mower deck. Meanwhile, you're going to aim your handle toward the emergency brake lever, and you have to go right in between the wires and the cable with this bracket right here. Closest to this panel, there is a rod down there in the way. You're going to go in between the rod and in between the wires and the cable. You have to be careful, watching out for your battery. And you're going to curl this bracket up as you're doing it. Take the back and put that underneath the frame. And then there's a bottom cable, slide that underneath the bracket. Then you can set the handle in place. And you have to be careful, making sure that your wires sit on top of the bracket and your cable. There's a notch cut out in the bracket for everything to go over top. Now take your carriage bolt, go from underneath, hold everything up there, just snug up the lock nut, do the same thing at the back, go from underneath, send the carriage bolt up through, and just snug up the lock nut. Looking down on top of that area, you can see where I went with that bracket. Down underneath the wires, in between the gold rod, I curled everything up, put the back underneath the frame first and then the front. And I have my wires and my cable sitting on top of the bracket. There is another cable down below, and that should be below the bracket. The directions tell you to snug up both lock nuts, but don't crank them all the way down because you will be removing these later on. Step 6 says to install this control cable. First, you'll need to cut this plastic tie. And then on the one end of the cable, you'll see some masking tape. You can remove that. Looks like a little tiny ball joint on the end of there. And it says to remove this cotter pin. Pull the cotter pin out. And to remove the pin. Then you're going to use the Torx head looking bolt and nut that comes along with the hardware. The directions really isn't clear at all which way you should route this cable up to the control handle. I'm going to go in right behind the rear deck hanger, go up underneath the frame, and route the cable right between the gold rod and the handle mounting bracket. I'm going to take another shot of this cable routing for you guys. I went right behind the deck hanger and right up alongside the frame. Hopefully you guys can see I routed the cable in between the frame and this gold rod. This cable here is going to be on this side of the cable toward the back of the machine. Now you want to slide this rubber boot up out of the way. Loosen up the jam nut, move that up to the boot, and you'll see 2 star lock type washers. Move one of those up there. Lower the cable through the slot, bring it up through the bracket. Turn one of the jam nuts down against the star lock washer. And we're going to leave this rubber boot right where it's at for now until we get everything else hooked up. Now you can see how I have the cable routed through the bracket with a jam nut down below with a washer and a washer on top and a jam nut. And I have that rubber boot about halfway up because we still may have to adjust this before I put that rubber boot back into place. Now you can take your cable, line it up with the top hole, insert the bolt through the cable, and we'll hand tighten the lock nut on the back. Step number 7 says to remove the chute deflector. You can discard that. And you want to do that by removing these carriage bolts. And it says to hang on to these bolts. You will need that in step 9. To remove these bolts, I'm using a 1/2-inch socket and a ratchet. Once you have the bolts removed, the chute deflector will lift right off. Step 8 says to remove the 3 self-tapping screws. I'm going to do that with a 1/2-inch socket and a 3/8 socket. Step 9 says to install the new chute assembly, and you're going to do that using the hardware you removed in step 7. The instruction booklet isn't very clear how to install this. You're going to install this tab right through this square hole right at the end of the deck opening. Then you can insert your carriage bolts through the square holes, one on each side, and hand tighten it with the lock nuts. Just showing you how I have that chute installed currently, and it looks just like that. Step number 10 says to install the chute door group. Doesn't show you where to mount it. I set it up on the outside of the mower deck, and when you close the chute, you'll see it leaves a gap along the top, closed nicely along the bottom, but that's going to leave grass blowing out the top of the chute. I don't feel that's the way to do it. I tried installing this bracket over your chute bracket and the other side on the mower deck frame. When you install it this way, it looks really nice. It looks like the bracket's supposed to go on the outside of the chute deflector bracket, and the rest go on the other side of the mower deck frame. But when you try to close this, can see it leaves a gap at the bottom on both ends, and grass is going to blow out between your mower deck and this rubber, so I don't like mounting it up this way. The way I feel this fits the best is to install this down between the deck frame and the chute deflector bracket. One end there's a slotted hole, and the other end there's 2 square holes. Now you can see when we have this chute door in place, now the rubber fits nice and tight against the mower deck up in the front and fits tight against the back of the chute opening. I also found out that the existing 1-inch long carriage bolts weren't long enough, and I had to get 1.25 inch long carriage bolts. And we'll insert them through the square holes on both sides. The instruction book also shows to come through the back side with the carriage bolts and put the nut on this side. I think it's best to put the carriage bolt this way and put your lock nut on the back side. And then we'll tighten it down with a 1/2 inch socket. Now I have everything bolted down. You can see the rubber flap fits real nice and tight against the mower deck, and nice and tight along the front of the mower deck and at the rear of the chute. Taking a look down from the top, you'll see where I mounted this bracket. Did leave a little gap on this side in between the deck and the chute mounting frame, but I filled that with 2 washers. On the other side, I didn't have to add any washers because you can see the bolt goes through the chute door bracket and through your main chute bracket. And I'll show you another angle, how the rubber fits real nice and tight against the mower deck now, how the top doesn't have any air gaps. And when you fold down the main chute, you can see it comes right up against the mower deck and along the top real nice. And it's hard to see, but taking a look at the rear of the mower deck, you can see how the flap fits real nice and tight against the rear of the chute opening. And you can take the main rubber chute, fold it down over this shaft, fits real nice, and the chute will fit real nice and tight along the mower deck. We removed these 3 tap screws earlier. Now in step 11, we're going to install this bracket. You're going to line up this spacer underneath the bracket. Then from underneath the deck, you're going to push the bolts up through and tighten them down with a lock nut on top. Step number 12 says to install the cable onto the bracket and onto the chute rod. I'm going to do that by pulling that rubber boot back again, loosening up one of the jam nuts, past the threads, and move one of the star washers up to the nut. And then you can insert it down into the slot. Push the washer and turn the nut. And the end of the cable will insert through the rod. And you'll tighten it with a lock nut. And now you want to make sure that your nut is tight at the end of this adjustment here. Tighten down the jam nut. And up on the handle, make sure that the bolt is going through the top hole, and tighten down this nut at this time and the jam nut. Step number 13 is adjusting the chute deflector. Go up to the handle, squeeze the button, lower it all the way down in the locking position. Go down to your chute deflector, make sure it's straight up and down or tight against the mower deck. Using the adjustments on the mower deck, move the cable either way to get the correct adjustment. And you'll want to use the adjustment by the handle to make sure that you can get the handle to lock in the lowered position and the raised position. Step number 14 is to tighten down all the adjustments made on the handle and down by the mower deck. Step number 15 is installing the chute cover over the chute cover bracket. And you're going to fasten it with the 5 self-tapping screws that came in the bag with the hardware. There is no threads in the bracket, so when you install the self-tapping bolts, they will go in kind of hard. Start each one, turn it in about halfway, and then go all the way around and tighten them all down. And one more little thing, guys, you may need to bend this rod, bend this tab in order for that to fit underneath this cover. Step number 16, you're going to remove the bolts holding the lift handle. After you remove the bolts, you're going to install this lift handle cover, slide it over the handle, and you're going to insert the slightly larger carriage bolts that were provided in the hardware down through the hole. And tighten them with a flange lock nut underneath. Number 17, you're going to reinstall the seat latch. The shoulder bolt that you took off earlier with the washer, you're going to install from this side, grabbing a hold of the latch. Carefully roll back your seat. And install the lock nut. Number 18 in the instruction manual, make sure your wheels are straight and we can reinstall the steering wheel. And you'll tighten it down with the bolt we removed earlier. And install the cap. In the instruction manual, number 19, they want you to remove the bolt on the right side with the washers, moving that to the left side. Take the left side and move that to the right side. Then we can set the seat back down, but before we do, I want to make sure we take a look at the wires and the cables and make sure nothing's going to get pinched and make sure everything's routed right. And that's it. Now we can lower our handle down, check to make sure our flap goes tight against the deck, and it does. We can lift the handle back up again, lock it into place. Then we can lower our chute down. We're ready to mow. So I hope this video helped you guys out. Please subscribe to my channel. You can also join my Facebook group. That's TractorTread - used tractors for sale. I'm Mark with the TractorTread YouTube channel. We'll see you on the next one.